Hello again everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What is the scariest, most bone-chilling story you've ever experienced or been told about? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
I was on the jury for a trial where a 70-year-old drunk driver hit and killed a motorcyclist after making an illegal turn. The police testified against him. All the evidence was against him. It was pretty cut and dry. Go into deliberations and both parties have rested, and one woman refuses to convict him on the most serious charge because he's old. She concedes on other charges and refuses to switch back because she's doing us all a favor by convicting on lesser charges. We sit there for hours trying to convince her. Then a fellow male juror switches to the other side because he wants to go home. Someone else gets hungry, so they give up as well. Other people switch, the jury can't come to a decision, and they can't convict him of the major crime. I won't forget seeing the wife of the motorcyclist cry, his parents in disbelief and start to cry, his young daughter just sitting there quietly. I work in mental health, particularly with people who have extensive suicidal ideation and multiple psychiatric hospitalizations. Despite working with this population for close to 10 years, I've only had one client successfully commit suicide. They poured gasoline over themselves and set themselves on fire. There are no words for how extremely terrifying that is to see. The worst part was that they didn't immediately die. I will hear them say, "This wasn't what I wanted," for the rest of my life. When I was about 12, my sibling broke down and told my mother that they had been touched by her grandfather. This was late at night, and me, my siblings, and my mom pretty much cried in a pile all night. It was one of the worst nights of my life. The next day we stayed home from school, but my mom still needs to go to work, no dad. We lived in an apartment that was semi-underground, and the window on our side of the house was pretty much on the ground outside. We hear a knock, and my grandpa's voice asking us to let him in. We were terrified, and we ran to close all the blinds and lock the back door. He was an exceptional manipulator, and he put on his sweetest, saddest grandpa voice and started knocking on all the windows, pleading with us to let him in. None of us are saying anything, and we're hiding. We call our mom and whisper that grandpa's here, and he's trying to get inside the house. He's tried opening the door, and when it is locked, he starts to get really angry. He wonders how we could do this to him, and how much he loves us, and nothing is wrong. He left after about 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. My mom rushed home as fast as she possibly could. I forget if it was the same or next day or a while later, but his and my grandma's house were searched by cops. They found he had set up a tube to go from a closet in his study — he would never let anyone else go in his study — to the bathroom, and he'd been watching us go to the bathroom and shower for I don't know how long. The good news is that he did go to prison, 3 years. We have to see him at family gatherings like funerals, and it makes my skin crawl. I've been mugged at gunpoint and almost kidnapped in Mexico by a gang of murderers fleeing America, 13 then. And my formerly sweet old grandpa, trying to get at us kids for God knows why, is the most terrified I've ever been in my life. Victim of a severe road rage incident. I'm a small 26-year-old woman in a Mazda 3. At roughly 7 a.m. in the winter on a mountain country back road, a giant Ford 350 decides I'm going too slow. He starts accelerating, first like he's going to ram me, then at the last moment passes me illegally on a turn. He gets in front of me, then slams on his brakes. I slam on mine and narrowly miss hitting him. We're sitting there for a minute when he starts revving his engine. He goes into reverse and tries hitting my car. I'm screaming and going in reverse. We are now both driving down the mountain in reverse. I use my Bluetooth to call 911. They can't make anything out. I'm saying because I'm screaming. After about 100 yards of driving backwards, he stops. I stop. I don't know why. I start talking to the 911 operator. The man gets out of his car with a weapon and starts running toward me. I scream again. In the distance, a car is coming, and the man runs back into his truck and flees. I've never in my life been so scared. Never have I thought I was about to be murdered. It is not a feeling you can forget, but it's hard to explain. I was crying and shaking uncontrollably for the next 6 hours. I do not drive that road anymore. Creepiest moment? Patrolling an empty warehouse. My radio goes off, and it's like a sort of demonic gibberish, and the light shuts off. I remember thinking, oh, no, I ain't being in a horror movie tonight. Beelined it for the door. I would have had to leave anyway to use my phone to call in the power outage. Later, I figured it was probably an electrical issue of some sort, causing radio interference and a power outage. I worked alone during those hours, so it was not a prank from someone else. School shooting at my high school. I was fine, but when the police evacuated us out of the school, they kind of walked us right through the area where it started. There was a lot of blood pretty much everywhere. They hadn't moved one of the bodies out either, and had covered him with a blanket, but we knew. Man, that shit sucked. That image of the school sticks with me, and it's been almost 20 years now. I was volunteering at a race and was in the middle of handing cups of Gatorade to thousands of exhausted runners who had just finished and were all shuffling past me. I'm facing them to give them this little cup, so I'm looking back down the race course at the finish line, about 50 feet from me. Massive boom suddenly, and I see this huge puff of smoke. Everybody jumps, it's so loud. Everybody turns and looks. All the hundreds of faces that a second ago had been facing me are now swiveled the other way. The puff of smoke goes rolling up the side of a church. A very eerie second of silence as everyone's watching the puff of smoke, and there's this weird, distant, high-pitched sound. Everyone's thinking, could that possibly have been a... Then suddenly, boom! The second one, bomb. And then the weird screams take this distant revolve into a wave of distant screams, like blood-curdling, desperate screams. The screams take this couple seconds to sort of hit peak volume, like they sort of ramp up, and there is this tone to the screams, this pitch and raggedness of sheer terror that like tripped some seriously weird alarm bells in my head, and every single one of those thousands of exhausted runners who had all been barely able to walk seconds before just all launch forward, almost levitating, and go sprinting past me. The look of that entire crowd just launching into motion in synchrony, all the hundreds of faces whipping toward me again, and every single person pushing off into this sprint. I'll never forget that. The volunteers around me run too. Everybody runs, except me and another volunteer, except the cops. These cops, who had been standing nearby chit-chatting, are instinctively and instantly running toward the booms. I've never seen a huge crowd flee in panic before, let alone a crowd that had been so exhausted before, and I've never seen cops in a moment of crisis run toward danger before. A second later, a wheelchair comes bolting towards us with the cluster of people around it and this white-faced volunteer pushing it, and there's a guy in it who I think is sitting with his legs folded under him, and he's holding these two red sticks out in front of him for some reason. He goes all the way past me before I realize the two red sticks are his tibias. He is not sitting with his legs folded under him. His legs have been blasted off. He was the first of 26 people with legs blasted off, and then 100 others with chunks of flesh gouged out and eyes missing. That was 4 years ago in Boston. This happened a month ago when I picked up my sister from a party. I was driving home, and along the way I saw this black car doing 15 miles per hour, flashing brake lights, turning on the left indicator signal, but making a right. Impatient, she decided to illegally cut him off and just go home. But after I did it, he began to speed up and flash his fog lights, signaling me to pull over. I just kept driving out, being crept out. My house was a couple of miles away with a lot of turns, but this guy kept tailgating me and pursuing me, which was getting pretty scary. I literally drove 50 miles in the radius of maybe 10 miles trying to get him off of me. I finally made a left turn where he couldn't follow or risk hitting another car. I quickly pulled over and turned off all my lights, only to see the car slowly drive by as I held my breath, hoping he didn't see me. After about 15 minutes, I look around and slowly drive home. My sister was drunk and asleep, so she basically didn't even know what happened. This is a bit different. The most scared I've ever been, and probably the closest I've been to death. I was by myself riding a motorcycle in a spirited fashion on a remote, forested mountain road that is famous among motorcycle riders. I came around a blind but high-speed corner at about 70 miles per hour. Suddenly I found myself confronted with a herd of about 20 elephants crossing in front of me. I literally couldn't see the road on the other side of the herd. I'm talking about a solid wall of 600 plus pound animals that are over 6 feet tall. I had enough time to close my eyes, and that's about it. At that speed, it would take over 200 feet to stop, and I had about 20 feet and no clear line through. Somehow, and I will never know for sure how, I got through totally unscathed. I remember hearing their hooves on the pavement. I pulled over and looked back to see the last of them running into the woods. I turned off my bike, got off, and sat on the side of the road for about 30 minutes until I mostly stopped shaking. Then I rode home very slowly. I haven't ridden that road since, or without a helmet camera. Edit. Interesting contrast in the comments. To clarify, these were moving animals. I was riding by myself, but this was not a deserted road. A guy in a car was about 5 seconds ahead of me. The car 10 seconds behind me probably didn't even see them. He only slowed down because he saw I was stopped. I would guess 2 to 3 vehicles go around this corner per minute, and none of them slow down. Had I been there 5 seconds earlier or 10 seconds later, I wouldn't have even known that they were there. I've never seen or even heard of elk being in the area, though it is in their range. Edit 2. For context, I've ridden about 500,000 miles and have been down 3 times. Twice on the track, totally my fault. Though, for one, I suspect my rear tire lost pressure. The other time was when a driver pulled out in front of me and I couldn't swing around because of oncoming traffic. I made eye contact with her and even let off on the throttle for a bit, but she suddenly decided to go. Somehow she looked right through my bright red bike and white helmet. I've avoided other cars dozens of times.
I'm assuming he meant elk instead of elephant in the story, because read it later it said elk and the whole weight thing was a little off, but either way, large animals like that coming around a turn, yeah, it's kind of a miracle. Glad you're okay.
When I was around 8, I got on a roller coaster at Six Flags in Houston. It had those foam-covered bars that locked over your shoulders and a small seat to sit on, but the feet dangled. About a minute into the ride, it starts twisting. I slip halfway out of the seat and almost out of the seatbelt, which was supposed to be checked for security beforehand, but wasn't tight enough. I spent the entire ride digging my little nails into the foam padding on the shoulder bars while the edge of the seat was digging into my back. My mom was sitting next to me and noticed what was happening. All she could do was reach my shirt, and she held on to that for the ride. I haven't been on a coaster since. My grandmother told my mother this story when she was younger. My grandmother was an X-ray tech, and they would often bring in inmates for emergencies, and my grandmother had to scan a man in full restraints. He was a violent inmate known for biting. He was wheeled in wearing a face guard, Hannibal Lecter style, and would speak only trying to thrash around against the restraints. Apparently, when he noticed there was a woman in that room, my grandmother made eye contact, bared his teeth, a mask stops the jaw from moving, and would only say, "Bite, bite," in a deep, slow tone. So, now that phrase really bothers my mom and is a good way to send chills down my family's spine. Scariest moment, I was about 16 or so and on my way to help decorate for a school dance. A buddy and I decided to go get snacks and drinks for everyone, and he's driving his hatchback Camaro, 1990s model. About halfway down the road while driving back with the snacks, we're coming around a fairly sharp right curve, and halfway through the curve, a truck comes blasting toward us, half on our side of the road. My friend swerves and overcorrects a few times until we are heading semi-straight on the road, not realizing we are still sliding a bit toward the ditch. He tries to save it, and we hit the ditch. On the driver's side, still moving fairly quickly. The last thing I remember before blacking out was us in midair careening into the ditch. The car was mangled and upside down, facing the opposite direction we were heading, and both of us were hanging upside down in our seats. He's still unconscious, and his head is tilted sideways against the roof. I had to crawl through the broken window on the back side and the hatch because the door was crushed. There was a man standing across the road who just happened to live right across from where we were crushed. He said we hit the ditch, flipped, and the top of the car was crushed bone in on a tree before rolling back down into the ditch upside down. I had a mild concussion, and he cracked a bone in his neck but wasn't paralyzed. We were lucky as hell. I still get nervous when riding as a passenger. Most bone-chilling. The day I had to use all the training in CPR I never imagined I'd ever need. Working at a grocery store, I heard a woman screaming about something in one of the aisles. Another woman comes running toward the front, panicked and asking if anyone knew CPR, as some guy collapsed and wasn't breathing. I closed my lane with people still in line and met a pharmacist who works there, halfway to the guy. The two of us were the only ones who were trained in CPR, and we worked for about 30 minutes, switching out every few minutes when one of us got exhausted. A lady came back and a few days later to the shop and told us she was a relative of his and that he didn't make it. But he thanked us for trying so hard to keep him alive until the paramedics got there. I still remember it like it's fresh in my mind. I once witnessed the aftermath of a bar fight. One small drunk guy kept pushing a large sober guy for no apparent reason. A large guy knocked him out with one punch, but from what I heard, it was a vicious punch. I found the man laying between two pool tables. He had hit his head pretty badly when he fell back. He was bleeding. He was completely out and wouldn't respond to any of the attempts to wake him up as we waited in the ambulance. The way he was breathing was the most disturbing thing I've ever seen. His body was in survival mode to keep his lungs pumping air. It was hard, forced breathing. Blood was pouring from his mouth because several of his teeth had been knocked out. When EMS finally came and took him away, I couldn't even look at him any longer. Just to see someone in such a helpless state. The poor man pissed me off. I found out later that he had to be flown into a larger hospital because he had bleeding on the brain. But he has apparently recovered and is still up to his old ways. I never want to see that ever again. There was one time my sister and I were waiting for the bus when suddenly a man from the other side of the road started shouting at us. He's dirty and dressed in rags, and he looked very unhinged and angry. There were cars passing by, but it didn't matter to him as he started dodging them, making his way toward us. Luckily, the bus arrived and we got inside. As soon as the door opened, we told the driver to close it immediately, and then a man arrived at the stated banging on the door. The driver got the drift, and we left. The last thing we saw of him was that he was still shouting and running after the bus. Everything happened so fast, we were just in shock for a little while. It was scary because we didn't know him, but for some reason he just wanted to attack us. During Katrina, I lived just outside of Jackson, Mississippi. My grandmother and cousin, who lived on the coast, had to come up and stay with us. We figured we'd be fine since no hurricane had done very much for that north. The storm had picked up pretty badly, and we were in the carport looking at the pine trees across the street bend. We kept saying how they were able and about to fall. We went back inside, and I started to listen to music on my CD player pretty loud. Out of nowhere, I see something pink and foamy fall from the ceiling and land in my cousin's face. She screams, louder than anyone I've ever been in contact with or heard before. I look to my dad and see him mouth, "Run." I get up, look behind me, and see a black tree branch, not 1 foot behind where my head had just been, sticking through the ground. The giant oak tree in our backyard had fallen on our house. The only reason I'm still alive is that the tree was forked and fell in just the right way to wedge itself into our chimney.